Okay, so for the nose, you definitely want to look at how your nose is reflecting your light source. There's a couple things to keep in mind with the value on the nose. Up here, the keystone area, which is where the bridge of your nose kind of angles upward into where it transitions to your forehead. You want to have a delicate shadow there, okay? Now mine is maybe a little bit too dark, so I'm actually going to take my kneaded eraser and just kind of dab some and just kind of swipe a little bit of value out of there, but I don't want it to be as bright as my forehead or as bright as the bridge of my nose. But to give it a little bit more form, I'm just going to go ahead and just to kind of make it less drastic, I'm going to go ahead and take a little bit of value out of there. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to work in with my hard charcoal, and I'm just looking at how this keystone area transitions from like my eyebrow to my eye socket to kind of the keystone area, and I want to look at how the value kind of wraps around there. And then I want to look at the value that falls on the bridge of my nose and how that transitions. And so I did talk a little bit earlier about how there is like a cast shadow here on the right side of my nose, or to the right of my nose. And so I want to make sure that I keep that consistent. And so I'm going to go ahead and just kind of add that in there and kind of help make that transition to my cheek area. And then I want to look at how the value shifts from there to the bridge of my nose. And so here, for me, there should be a gradual shift in the value because that's kind of a more rounded part of my nose. I also feel like I need to kind of dab out this area a tiny bit. And so I'm just going to go ahead and kind of blend that with the kneaded eraser a bit. And then I'm just going to look at how the value kind of transitions. Around the bridge of the nose. And so I tend to have a shadow that kind of falls right around kind of the bridge of the nose bone here. And then I have kind of a second shadow that falls over to the right here because the side of my nose here kind of gets some reflected light in it. And it's kind of the same thing over on this side. I get a little bit of reflected light in there. And so I'm going to go ahead and just make sure that I kind of show that reflected light as being a little bit lighter than the shadowed area around it. Okay, and then I want to clean up kind of some edges and some shadows around my nostrils and add any middle value that needs to happen there. I also want to look at how the value goes around kind of this center, kind of like the ball of my nose, which is more of a diamond shape for me. And so I'm really looking observationally at all of this. And I'm using my hard charcoal to get those later middle values in there, kind of these subtle shifts in value from dark to light. And so if you want a highlight to pop, which in your nose, you're probably going to have some highlights that pop because of the drastic changes in the direction of the form, how it's like suddenly rounded out. Sometimes you can just lightly outline a highlight to make it pop a little bit more. The nostrils are going to be darker. The highlights on the nostrils tend to not be as light as the highlights on the ball of the nose. And that's because they're back in space a little bit. So they're going to have less contrast. Okay, and then I do have some darker shadowed areas that I'm going to have to deal with here, kind of cast shadows from the nose that change in value and shift around too. In some of those areas, I'm going to need my 6B charcoal for. So the shadows that kind of fall into the nostril area, are going to be darker. The cast shadows kind of coming off from there have some different values to them too. And so I'm not really crazy about how this value looks here. I think it just looks, it shows a little bit too much of the tooth of the paper. And so I'm going to go in with a blending stump and kind of blend that. And that sometimes happens when you use your pencil. It just kind of glides over top of the tooth of the paper, and that's okay. Sometimes it's really helpful to show different textures that way. But I want to soften this into the tooth of the paper so there's kind of less texture there. And then I'm going to go in with my 6B again and just kind of get the darkest values. And I think I'm also going to have to take my kneaded eraser and kind of pull out some light values again too. Okay, and so I just continue to work from observation, switching between my 6B charcoal, my hard charcoal, my kneaded eraser, my blending stumps, whatever I need to use to get the value that is there. I can blend a little bit with the kneaded eraser and the hard charcoal. I can kind of drag some values kind of into each other and use them almost like a blending stump in some ways. And so that's kind of a helpful thing to know. I do want to make sure that I'm getting the form of like the underside of my nostrils so it feels more three-dimensional. I want to make sure that I'm also getting the form kind of in the ball of my nose and kind of the subtle shifts in direction of that form by putting in some more middle values as well. The hard charcoal is really great for that because it helps me to kind of get more precise middle values. It's easier to control than the 6B charcoal. So it is nice at this point where you're adding more detail to kind of switch back and forth. The blending stump can also still be used in areas to kind of shift value to help make the tooth of the paper look less obvious and even out areas as well.